Shane Coleman, the opposition are making political capital out of this. They're putting questions to Enda Kenny that he can't answer. I mean, he's right insofar as when you're negotiating, the best thing you can do is keep your mouth shut. Yeah. But it also gives rise to a concern that perhaps they don't have the deal as close to being signed as we would like.
They clearly don't, Jonathan. I'm not sure it was ever realistic that we were going to get a deferral of this payment, and I always thought it was likely that we would have to pay this money by the end of March. And as we heard from your clip there, the ECB don't like being bounced into things. They certainly don't like having political pressure put on them, and the one thing they don't want is to set a precedent that in order for a country to sign off on this deal, they have to get some kind of package. So I think down the line there is a very, very good chance we will get some kind of renegotiation and lessening of the burden of this deal. I wouldn't put it any stronger than that. But the idea that there was going to be a deferral, certainly the contacts I was speaking to in recent weeks around government, never thought this was likely. You're right, Enda Kenny, you know, what he was saying there, is spin bail and how silent is golden. Now the problem for his government is, problem for Enda Kenny is that while maybe he's being consistent on this,
obviously there's a few ministers in cabinet who don't believe that silence is golden.
Yeah, his cabinet ministers haven't been consistent on this, and one of his ministers, Joan Burton, specifically linked this issue, the promissory notes and the referendum campaign. Now that went down like a lead balloon in government, and Enda Kenny, not referring to anybody in particular, but I think it was obvious who he was referring to at last week's cabinet meeting, basically said that people would have to be careful about what they said. So a lot of irritation in government about that. I actually thought Micheál Martin was quite effective in how he put this question today in the Dáil. I think he's right. I think he is fair enough for the opposition to point out that the government are speaking with different tongues on this issue. And
but Enda Kenny, to be fair to Enda Kenny, he has been consistent. He alone has been consistent on this one. He hasn't given away any hint as to what might be going on, but other ministers just can't do it. And is that why the Europeans are getting annoyed with it?
Well, interesting. I mean, listening to Ollie Rehn yesterday and how the irritated manner he answered the question. I mean, the question is he irritated with Irish journalists for consistently asking this question, or is there an irritation with the Irish government and particularly ministers who they feel can't keep quiet about this issue? Now, if it's an irritation with journalists, I don't think that's a big problem. But if
we get under everyone's
that's our job, to get under people's skin. But if there's an irritation in Brussels towards the government and how they're handling this, well, then that is a problem for Enda Kenny. And I think you saw today how he reacted, very much saying we need to be calm about this. I'm not putting a time limit on this. I'm not building expectations on this. I think that's the right approach, but it has to be consistent, and it can't just be Enda Kenny saying that. It has to be all his ministers.
And again, we're dealing in rumour and conjecture and nod and wink. Shane Ross was on the programme earlier on. He said there are still rumblings around the Dáil even now that this payment could actually be delayed, at least. I mean, is there even a possibility at that it could be delayed? That could be seen as some kind of concession, and I know we're not linking the two, but that would help the referendum in May or June or whenever we go to vote. Well,
I'd be surprised if that happened, and certainly the contacts I've been speaking to in recent weeks have always thought that was a long shot. They always thought it was more likely that we'd have to pay the 3.1 billion, but that somewhere down the road, somewhere between now and October, and quite possibly after the referendum takes place, there will be some kind of renegotiation of the deal or lessening of the burden. But there's not going to be any write-off, and I think anyone hoping for that is going to be disappointed. I think it's more about spreading the payments out over a longer period of time, lessening the burden year on year, maybe from 3.1 billion down to 2 billion or 1.5 billion. That would make a difference. It would make a considerable difference. It's not a panacea for all our problems, though.
Just before we finish up, this idea that the TDs need an extra day off next Tuesday to recover from the bank holiday that's on the Monday, the rest of us will be back at work. Well, some of us will even be at work on the bank holiday Monday, but most people go back on Tuesday. Why do the poor unfortunate little TDs need the extra day off?
Well, the argument is, I think, that the civil servants won't be there on the Monday, so in order to prepare, answers to Dáil questions and so on.
Yeah, but the Dáil doesn't sit. I mean, people think that the Dáil is sitting at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. It doesn't. I mean, when the Dáil sits Tuesday afternoon, 2 o'clock, the Taoiseach isn't there until 4 o'clock. So there's a lot of time to get things done.
There is, and there's also the previous Friday. Let's not forget. I mean, the Dáil only sits unless it's the first Friday of the month. The Dáil doesn't sit on the Friday, so you have Friday and Monday. I wouldn't have thought it's beyond the capabilities of the civil service to produce Dáil questions for a Tuesday after a bank holiday. I don't think it's too much to expect. And then this government promised was going to have a 50% increase in sitting days in the Dáil, and we're also seeing with the Easter holidays coming up, I mean, the Dáil isn't returning until the Wednesday week after Easter Sunday.
And this was what they had themselves been jumping up and down about when they were in opposition, that the Dáil was being silenced by Fianna Fáil, that they weren't allowed to come in and argue the points. And now, despite the fact they promised it, I mean, there's a lot of broken promise allegations being thrown around, but Dáil reform certainly seems to be towards the top of that list.
It does. I'm covering the Dáil long enough to know that whenever you're in a party's in opposition, they're always kicking and screaming about the Dáil sitting more, and then when that same party gets into government, they don't want the Dáil sitting as much. Governments tend to do better in opinion polls, they tend to do better in approval ratings, they tend to have an easier time when the Dáil isn't sitting. So it's inevitable when you're in government, you don't want the Dáil sitting. But the difficulty for this government is that they made a specific promise about a 50% increase in Dáil days. They would argue they have done it in their first year, but they've only done it because we had a general election that basically took the whole of February out for the previous administration. Let's wait and see. If you look at the calendar year last year, the Dáil, I think, only sat for 108 days, Jonathan. That's what, one in three, less than 1 in 3. That's not good enough. All right, Shane Coleman, Newstalk's political editor. Thanks for talking us through all of that, Shane. This is Newstalk Lunchtime with Jonathan Healy.